At 2 a.m., the rustling beside me woke me. I saw Marcus's brow tightly furrowed. I couldn't help but ask, "Why are you back? Did you have a fight with her?" He remained silent for a moment, then gave a slow nod. I sat up and offered a quiet word of comfort. "She's young and spoiled, just throwing a little tantrum. Buy her that bag or necklace she's been eyeing tomorrow, and she'll be fine." He stared at me, a deep, unreadable look in his eyes, but ultimately didn't say a word. I lay back down and fell asleep as peacefully as ever. For years, it had taken 4 years to transform me from a hysterical, suicidal, jealous wreck to his most understanding confidant. At 7 a.m., Marcus walked out of the bedroom. He glanced at me. "What's your schedule for today?" "I have plans for coffee," I replied, sliding the bowl of oatmeal toward him. "Want some?" He didn't sit. He pulled an envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "See if you like these." Inside were 2 VIP tickets to an art exhibition. I tucked them into my bag. "Thanks. What brought this on?" "Tessa likes the artist." He paused, his voice dropping slightly. "These were extras." I nodded. If this had been years ago, that bowl of oatmeal would have been dripping from his face by now. But now I had learned not to waste food. I took a quiet sip. He lingered, waiting for a reaction. When none came, he turned and left. It wasn't long before my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I used to ignore calls like this to avoid hearing her voice, but I had outgrown that habit. I picked up and put it on speaker. "Hey, Vivian. It's Tessa. Marcus left some important documents at my place. Do you mind swinging by to pick them up?" I scooped up another bite of oatmeal. "He has keys, can get them himself." "Actually, I wanted to talk to you. There are things I've been keeping inside." My expression didn't change. "I'm busy this afternoon. Maybe another time." I hung up. I was never actually a generous woman. Tessa had been provoking me for exactly 4 years and 8 days. I kept count. At first, I was a tinderbox, blowing up at the slightest spark and making a fool of myself. Later, friends advised me to focus on myself and ignore her. So Tessa shifted her strategy. She stopped hiding and started pushing herself into my life. One day, she'd post the designer bag Marcus bought her. The next, she'd send screenshots of their late-night texts. In the end, I couldn't take it and went to confront her. But Marcus always believed her over me. The more I fought, the uglier it got, trapping me in a vicious, suffocating cycle. But now, no matter what card she played, they had lost their power over me. At 3 p.m., I had barely been at the cafe for half an hour when Marcus suddenly showed up. He rarely crashed my plans. This was a surprise. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, pulling out a chair and casually flipping through the menu. My friend, taking the hint, politely excused herself. I looked at him. "Is something wrong? Did Tessa call you this morning?" "Yes." "What did she say?" I looked up at him. What could she say? Nothing but her usual boasts about how he was a beast in her bed, but a corpse in mine. I still remembered the first time she called me. It was our 2nd anniversary. I had hosted a small dinner party, inviting our closest friends to celebrate our marriage. We waited for him until the party was nearly over. Then an unknown number called, filling the line with heavy, breathless gasps. Just as I was about to apologize for a wrong number, a familiar male voice came through the speaker, breathless and feral. "Tessa, don't bite." Our friends froze, glasses suspended in midair before leaving. Every single one of them offered the same well-meaning advice. "Vivian, Marcus is a powerful man now. The temptations are endless. Talk to him when he gets back. But don't do anything rash." And I listened. That night we sat in the living room until 3 a.m. I didn't scream, and he confessed, claimed it was a momentary lapse, that he'd had too much to drink and mistook Tessa for me. Then he dropped to his knees begging for forgiveness, swearing he would never do it again, swearing I was his only love. I believed him. I thought that by exposing Tessa's cheap trick, Marcus would see her for what she was and keep his distance. After all, what self-respecting man wouldn't learn his lesson after being manipulated like that? But he didn't. Instead of backing away, he decided Tessa was brave enough to risk everything for him, and his heart bled for her. Behind my back, he bought her a luxury apartment downtown, nurturing her with his wealth and affection. That was when I finally understood there was no mistaken identity. He knew exactly what he was doing. Tessa wasn't an accident. She was his choice. And I was the one left behind, biting my tongue and pretending to be the bigger person, pulling myself out of the memory. I looked up at him and shook my head nothing. But I knew him well enough to know this question wasn't innocent. I must have done something to hurt Tessa. Again, I set my cup down. Did she tell you something? Did she say I hired someone to ruin her? Or that I put up banners at her apartment complex to trash her reputation? You can just say it, Marcus. No need to test me. I can explain. I used to do countless stupid things when she pushed my buttons. And, by some cruel stroke of luck, Marcus would always catch me in the act. The villain was cast, and I was banished to the cold. But I had learned my lesson. No more desperate explanations. No more frantic counterattacks. I lifted my cup, took a slow, deliberate sip and waited for him to show his hand. He blinked, his face darkening slightly. She didn't say anything. I nodded. How rare. His lips parted, and he turned his cup in a slow circle. I came back last night because we had a fight, but that wasn't the only reason. Mainly because of the fight. Then what? What else? I waved the waiter over to refill my hot water. Can you stop doing this? He rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. If you're angry, just say it. I'm perfectly fine, Marcus. You're overthinking things. He didn't speak, just kept staring at me. I didn't know how to make him believe me, because, honestly, even I found it hard to believe I had lost everything in this marriage. How could I possibly be fine? But I couldn't explain it to him. Suddenly, his favorite phrase felt incredibly useful. If that's what you want to think, I can't stop you. He let those words sink in, paused, then got up and walked out. I watched his retreating back then, and picked up my book again. Over the past 4 years, countless nights of him not coming home had eroded my boundaries to dust. I had screamed. I had threatened to end it all, only to end up more broken than before. Now that I truly didn't care, he suddenly wanted me to express my feelings. I was never meant to be a bitter wife. Before Marcus, I was always poised, logical and entirely in control. Back when I was making waves on Wall Street, I never imagined I would lose myself to a relationship. I had become the very kind of woman I used to despise. Love makes you selfish, demanding exclusivity. And when you can't have it, you unravel. But once the love is gone, you find your way back to who you were. At 8 p.m., as I was getting ready to head home, Tessa sent a voice note. I tapped it. Hey, Viv. Marcus had too much to drink, and he's insisting I pick him up. But I'm not his wife, am I? Maybe you should come instead. A location pin followed. It was a bar downtown. I didn't go. Instead, I called Albert. Marcus is drunk. I'll text you the address. Go pick him up at 11 p.m. Albert lugged Marcus back, freaking of alcohol. When I opened the door, Marcus nearly collapsed on top of me. Where's Tessa? I asked Albert. The bartender said, Miss Tessa expected you to show up. She wanted Mr. Marcus to choose between the two of you tonight. She didn't expect me. She tried to drag him away in a huff, but he wanted to keep drinking. I couldn't watch any longer, so I just put him in the car. I helped him onto the bed and loosened his tie. He suddenly grabbed my hand. Do you not love me anymore? You're drunk. I'm not drunk. His eyes were bloodshot. You used to cry. You used to dream and throw things. Now, even when Tessa baits you, you don't care what is going on in your head. I pulled my hand free. Go to sleep. He rolled over, muttering under his breath. You didn't come to get me. I found it almost laughable. Get him. Every time I tried to rescue him in the past, I was met with a locked door. Even on his father's Memorial Day, I went to his office to pick him up, but Tessa called complaining of a headache and he rushed to her side. Viv, it's a matter of life and death. I have to get her to the clinic first. Rest of us became invisible props in his life. That day, I stood there, holding the memorial offerings for half an hour, before heading to the cemetery alone. In their game of choose one, I was never the choice. They might not be tired of playing, but I was done. The next morning, before he even woke up, I went to the bank. The teller asked Mrs. Marcus, Are you sure? You want to transfer this fixed deposit to a checking account? Is there an emergency? I'm planning to go abroad soon. Just preparing in advance. As I walked out, I ran into Tessa. She was standing near the entrance, a smirk playing on her lips. What a coincidence, Viv. After 4 years of dealing with her, I knew every trick in her book. I used to take the bait, shaking with rage while she watched the show. Now I couldn't be bothered. Indeed, I didn't break my stride. She called out behind me, Don't you want to know what happened at the bar last night? I didn't turn around. She raised her voice. You don't love him anymore, do you? I paused. This was one question I couldn't ignore. A wife naturally loves her husband. Why does an outsider care so much you? She was left speechless, her face flushed with irritation. When I got home, Marcus was awake, sitting in the living room and smoking. For all his flaws, he rarely smoked inside the house. I frowned and opened the windows to let the smoke out. Have you been neglecting your girl lately? She's been following me around. I approached him, pulling a box I had prepared long ago from the cabinet under the coffee table. I slid it toward him. This is a limited edition bracelet. Use it to patch things up with her. His fingers holding the cigarettes. And by the way, I continued ignoring his reaction. The peace offering fund you kept with me has been draining fast. These past 2 months, Budget wisely. Try not to upset her so often. This was the arrangement we agreed on during our truce. Every penny he spent on Tessa had to go through my accounts. I wanted to see every transaction. I couldn't stop him from spending money on his mistress, but instead of driving myself mad with speculation, I preferred to see the cold, hard numbers. His face darkened, and he muttered a brief response before stubbing out his cigarette. The bank called. They said you made a major transfer. His voice quieted. Are you leaving the country? I hadn't expected a man who normally ignored me to suddenly care about my finances. Our marriage had crumbled because of secrecy, and the cracks had only widened when the truth came out. So I had no intention of lying. Yes, I'm planning to study abroad for a while. He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. Are you getting ready for a divorce? Divorce. This marriage gave me wealth and status. As long as I didn't crave his affection, it was a comfortable arrangement. I had no plans to divorce him. I just want to get away for a bit. I answered honestly. And what about me? I looked at him genuinely puzzled. Marcus, these past 4 years have taught me one thing. A person must prioritize their own peace of mind. The same goes for you. Stop worrying about whether I'll be angry. And just do what you want to do. He stood up, his voice raspy. I've told you 1,000 times. Tessa is just never mind. What if I told you I'm ready to cut things off with her? That's your business. You don't need to consult me. If he cut off Tessa, there would only be another Tessa. A man who strays once will stray again. I understood that much. Before he could say more, the doorbell rang. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose and went to open it. It was Tessa, it seems. She had followed me all the way home. Tessa was wearing a pale pink trench coat, the very one Marcus had bought her during his business trip to Paris last spring. Her hair was slightly damp from the light drizzle outside, clinging to her cheeks in thin, dark spirals. She looked delicate, fragile, and entirely out of place in the quiet, sterile hallway of our apartment building. Marcus, she breathed, her voice carrying that familiar tremor of practiced vulnerability. Your phone was off. I was worried. Marcus didn't move. His hand remained frozen on the doorknob, his knuckles white. I could see the rigid tension in his shoulders, the sudden, sharp intake of his breath. For 4 years, his instinct in these moments had been to shield her, to step between us, to look at me with a warning glare that said don't you dare touch her. But today, he didn't step forward. Instead, he took a half step back, his eyes darting nervously over his shoulder toward me. I stayed seated on the sofa, my legs crossed, a book resting open on my lap. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and thick, punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator. Well, don't just leave her standing in the draft, Marcus. I said, my tone as casual as if we were discussing the weather. Invite her in. The tea is still warm. Tessa's eyes flicked past him, finding me. For a fraction of a second, a spark of satisfaction flared in her expression, the thrill of the hunter closing in on her prey. She expected the usual, the sudden tightening of my jaw, the tremble in my voice, the frantic, humiliating demand for her to leave. She wanted the storm. Vivian, she said, stepping over the threshold before Marcus could stop her. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. But Marcus left his cufflinks at my apartment yesterday, and I knew he had an important board meeting tomorrow. I didn't want him to be unprepared. She reached into her designer handbag, the one I had approved the invoice for 3 months ago, and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Marcus looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Tessa, he muttered, his voice strained and low. You shouldn't have come here. I told you I'd handle it. I was just trying to help, she whispered, her lower lip trembling slightly. It was a masterpiece of a performance, refined over 48 months of trial and error. I set my book down on the coffee table, stood up, and walked over to them. I didn't rush. I didn't feel that cold, sickening rush of adrenaline that used to make my ears ring and my hands shake. I felt nothing, just the mild, polite interest of a host greeting an unexpected guest. How thoughtful of you, Tessa, I said, reaching out to take the velvet pouch from her hand. Our fingers brushed. Hers were icy, mine were warm. Marcus is terribly forgetful these days. It must be the stress. I opened the pouch, tipped the cufflinks into my palm, and examined them. They were the custom platinum ones I had gifted him for our 5th anniversary. I smiled, a small, genuine curve of my lips, and tossed them onto the entryway console. Since you're here, you might as well take this, I added, turning back to the living room. I picked up the small, beautifully wrapped jewelry box containing the limited edition bracelet, the one I had just handed Marcus moments before her arrival. I held it out to her. Tessa froze. Her eyes went from the box to my face, searching for the trap, the sarcasm, the hidden malice. But she found only smooth, unbothered tranquility. What's this? she asked, her voice losing a bit of its breathy sweetness, replaced by a sharper, defensive edge. A peace offering, I replied smoothly. Marcus was just telling me that the two of you had a bit of a disagreement last night. He was too embarrassed to give this to you himself, so I'm doing him a favor. It's the limited edition piece from the spring collection. I believe you had it on your wish list. Vivian, stop, Marcus growled, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and deep, agonizing embarrassment. He grabbed my wrist, his grip tight, almost desperate. Don't do this. I looked down at his hand on my wrist. I didn't pull away. I just looked at him until he slowly, reluctantly let go. Do what, Marcus? I'm only trying to help you keep the peace, I said softly. Then, looking back at Tessa, I gave her a polite, dismissive nod. You two must have a lot to discuss. I have some packing to do, so, if you'll excuse me. I turned and walked toward the master bedroom, leaving them standing in the foyer. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I heard Tessa's voice rise, sharp and frantic. Marcus, what is she talking about? What do you mean, packing? Is she leaving? Is this some kind of game? Shut up, Tessa, Marcus snapped. It was the first time I had ever heard him speak to her in that tone. There was no tenderness, no protective warmth, only raw, naked panic. Just get out. Get out of my house. I locked the bedroom door, pulled my suitcase out from the top of the closet, and laid it open on the bed. The shouting in the living room grew muffled, then faded entirely as the heavy front door clicked shut. A moment later, there was a tentative knock on my bedroom door. Vivian? Marcus's voice was hoarse. Open the door, please. I didn't answer. I reached into my dresser, pulling out my silk blouses, folding them precisely, and placing them into the suitcase. In my 20s, before I met Marcus, I was an analyst at a major investment firm on Wall Street. I was known for my cold-blooded efficiency. I could look at a failing portfolio, identify the exact moment a stock became a liability, and cut it loose without a single pang of regret. Sunk cost fallacy. I used to lecture junior analysts. Never pour good money after bad. The moment the trajectory is unsalvageable, you liquidate and move on. Yet when it came to my marriage, I had spent 4 years violating my own golden rule. I had poured my tears, my dignity, my youth, and my sanity into a bankrupt investment, desperately hoping that if I just held on a little longer, the market would turn. Now, the liquidation was finally complete. The next morning, the apartment was quiet. Marcus had spent the night on the living room sofa. When I walked out of the bedroom at 6:30 a.m., dressed in a sharp, tailored cream-colored suit, he was already awake. He was sitting at the kitchen island, a cold cup of coffee in front of him, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He looked up as I entered, his gaze instantly dropping to the sleek, titanium suitcase rolling silently beside me. You're really going, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a dull realization. My flight to London is at noon, I replied, setting my handbag on the counter. I have a few hours of meetings with my lawyer first to finalize the power of attorney over the real estate assets while I'm away. Vivian, we don't have to do this, he said, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He stepped toward me, his hands reaching out, but stopping short of touching me, as if afraid I might vanish into thin air. I'll break it off with her. Completely. I'll buy out her apartment, send her to another city, change my number, whatever you want. Just tell me what you want me to do. I looked at him. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes, the desperation etched into his handsome face. For years, I would have given my right arm to hear those words. I would have wept with relief, thrown my arms around his neck, and believed him. But looking at him now, I felt only a mild clinical curiosity. Marcus, I said, my voice gentle, almost pitying. Do you remember our 3rd anniversary? He blinked, thrown off by the question. Our 3rd anniversary? Yes, of course. We went to that French restaurant downtown. No, I corrected him softly. We had reservations at that restaurant. But you called me 30 minutes before we were supposed to meet. You said your car had broken down on the highway and you were waiting for a tow truck. You told me to go home, and that we would celebrate the next day. Marcus's face went pale. He swallowed hard. I didn't go home, I continued, adjusting the strap of my handbag. I drove out to the highway to find you. I thought you might be cold. I thought you might need a ride. But your car wasn't there. So, I drove to Tessa's apartment complex. And there was your car, parked in her spot. I sat in my car across the street for 3 hours, Marcus. I watched the lights in her living room go off. I watched the bedroom light turn on. Vivian, I'm sorry. He choked out, a tear finally escaping his eye, tracking down his cheek. I was an idiot. I was weak. I'm not telling you this to make you apologize, I interrupted. I'm telling you this because that night, I wanted to die. I felt a pain so intense I thought my chest would literally crack open. I went home, and I took half a bottle of sleeping pills. I threw them up an hour later because I was too terrified of the empty space I would leave behind. I stepped closer to him, looking directly into his eyes. That was 3 years ago. Since then, you've spent countless nights with her. You've bought her apartments, cars, jewelry. You've whispered the same promises to her that you once whispered to me. And slowly, bit by bit, the woman who wanted to die for you died anyway. But she didn't die from pills, Marcus. She died from exhaustion. I smiled, a soft, peaceful expression. The woman standing in front of you today doesn't hate you. She doesn't love you. She simply doesn't care. If you cut things off with Tessa, or if you marry her tomorrow, it makes absolutely no difference to me. Do you understand? He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, his chest heaving. The sheer weight of my indifference seemed to crush him more than any screaming match ever could have. He realized, in that moment, that there was no leverage left. You cannot threaten a person who wants nothing from you. You cannot hurt someone who has already let you go. I have to go, I said, checking my watch. The lawyer is waiting. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked toward the door. Vivian, he called out, his voice cracking. Are you coming back? I paused at the threshold, looking back at the beautiful, expensive apartment we had shared, the life we had built on a foundation of lies and endurance. Only to sign the papers, Marcus, I said quietly. And with that, I closed the door behind me. The air in London was crisp and biting, a welcome contrast to the humid, suffocating atmosphere I had left behind. I settled into a modern, minimalist flat in Kensington. It was small compared to the penthouse and home, but it was mine. There were no traces of Marcus here. No custom-made suits hanging in the closet, no lingering scent of his cologne, no sudden, late-night phone calls breaking the silence. Within 3 weeks, I had reconnected with several of my old colleagues from my Wall Street days who had relocated to the city's financial district. Re-entering the high-stakes world of international finance wasn't easy after a 4-year hiatus, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The brain fog of constant anxiety, jealousy, and self-doubt had cleared, leaving behind the cold, calculating intellect that had once made me a rising star. I took a position as a senior consultant at a private equity firm. My days were filled with market analysis, client meetings, and financial restructuring. I worked 12-hour days, and for the first time in years, I went to sleep at night because I was physically tired, not because I was emotionally drained. I didn't block Marcus's number. Blocking someone required effort, an emotional statement of, I am shutting you out. I simply muted him. Sometimes, when I had a free moment during my commute, I would look at the notifications. Marcus, 10:14 p.m., I went to the art exhibition today. The one with the VIP tickets. I went alone. It wasn't the same without you. Marcus, 2:45 a.m. Tessa came over tonight. She tried to move her things into the apartment. I threw her out. I changed the locks, Vivian. I swear. Please call me. Marcus, 8:12 a.m. I saw the financial statements. You liquidated the joint savings account. You only took your half. Why didn't you take it all? You know I would have let you. I never replied. I would read the messages with the same detached curiosity I used to read the morning financial columns, then slide my phone back into my pocket. 2 months into my stay in London, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I was sitting in a chic cafe near the office, sipping an espresso, and reviewing a prospectus for an upcoming acquisition. I answered, putting the phone to my ear. Vivian. It wasn't Marcus. It was Tessa. Her voice was different now, no longer the soft, breathy whisper of a victim, nor the smug tone of a victorious mistress. She sounded frantic, exhausted, and bitter. Tessa, I said, keeping my voice level. How did you get this number? It doesn't matter, she spat. You think you're so smart, don't you? Running away to London, playing the tragic, dignified wife. You think you've won because Marcus is miserable. I don't think about Marcus at all, Tessa, I said honestly. Liar, she cried, her voice cracking. He's obsessed with you. Ever since you left, he won't touch me. He won't even look at me. He stopped paying the rent on my apartment. He had his lawyers send me an eviction notice. He told me I was nothing but a mistake, a cheap substitute for you. I took a slow sip of my espresso, listening to her unravel. He's destroying himself, Vivian, she continued, her tone shifting from angry to desperate. He's drinking every night. He missed a major shareholder meeting last week. The board is talking about replacing him. You have to come back. You have to tell him to stop. He only listens to you. I looked out the window of the cafe. The autumn leaves were falling, swirling in the wind down the cobblestone street. I felt a sudden, profound sense of pity, not for Marcus, and not even really for Tessa, but for the sheer absurdity of the game we had all been playing for 4 years. Tessa, I said quietly, do you know why Marcus was drawn to you in the first place? Silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't because you were younger or more beautiful, or because you were brave enough to risk everything for him, I said. It was because you were a weapon he could use against me. He wanted to see how far he could push me before I broke. He wanted to see how much I loved him by measuring the depth of my despair. My jealousy was his oxygen. It proved to him that he was powerful, that he was desired, that he was the center of my universe. I paused, letting the words sink in. But now I've left the game. The playing field is empty. And without me there to react, without me to scream, cry, and play the villain, there is no joy in his betrayal. The forbidden fruit has become just another piece of rotting fruit on the ground. He doesn't hate you, Tessa. He's just bored. And he's terrified because he realized that in his quest to prove his power over me, he lost the only valuable thing he actually had. You don't care at all? She whispered, her voice trembling. Even after everything I did to you? I don't, I said. And honestly, Tessa, you should stop caring too. You spent 4 years trying to steal another woman's husband, only to find out that the prize was a hollow shell of a man who only knows how to destroy. You've wasted your youth on him. Don't waste your future. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, without another word, she hung up. I set my phone down on the table, picked up my pen, and went back to my prospectus. 6 months later, I returned to my home city. The divorce proceedings had been finalized through our lawyers. Marcus had tried to contest the division of assets, not because he wanted the money, he was independently wealthy, but because he wanted to force me to appear in court. He wanted to see me, but my legal team was ruthless, and I had left them with strict instructions. In the end, he signed the papers without a trial. I only had one final task to complete, removing my remaining personal belongings from the penthouse and signing over the deed of the property to him, as agreed in our settlement. I had arranged the visit for a Tuesday afternoon, a time when Marcus was guaranteed to be at his office for the weekly executive board meeting. I wanted a clean, quiet exit. The apartment building looked exactly the same. The doorman, who had known me for years, gave me a sad, sympathetic look as he held the door open. "Welcome back, Mrs. Lynn. Sorry, Miss Vivian," he stammered. "Thank you, Thomas," I said with a warm smile. "It's good to see you." I took the private elevator to the penthouse. The keycard clicked, and the heavy mahogany door swung open. The apartment was dark. The heavy drapes were drawn, shutting out the brilliant afternoon sun. The air was stale, smelling faintly of old takeout, expensive whiskey, and cigarette smoke. It looked like a museum that had been abandoned overnight. I walked into the living room. On the coffee table sat several empty bottles of scotch, a pile of unopened mail, and a framed photograph of our wedding day, the glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern across our faces. I sighed, pulling a pair of flat shoes from my bag to change into, and went to work. I had hired a moving company to pack up my remaining books, art pieces, and family heirlooms, but I wanted to personally sort through my study. As I was wrapping a delicate porcelain vase my grandmother had given me, I heard the sound of the front door opening. I froze for a fraction of a second, then relaxed. Footsteps approached the study, heavy, uneven, and hesitant. I turned around. Marcus stood in the doorway. He looked 10 years older. He had lost weight, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. His tie was undone, his collar frayed, and his face was covered in a rough, uneven stubble. He looked like a man who had been wandering in a desert for months. "You're here," he whispered. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice polite. "I thought you had your executive meeting today." "I resigned," he said, taking a step into the room. "Actually, the board asked me to step down. I haven't been focused lately." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though my voice carried no real emotion. "You worked very hard for that position." "I didn't care about the position," he said, his eyes scanning my face hungrily, as if trying to memorize every detail. "I only cared about building an empire, so you would be proud of me. So you would look at me the way you used to when we were in college." I didn't point out the hypocrisy of his statement. I didn't remind him of the nights he had spent in Tessa's bed while his empire was being built. There was no point in arguing with the revisionist history. "The movers will be here in an hour," I said, returning to my packing. "I'll be out of your way soon." Marcus walked over to the desk, his hand reaching out to touch the edge of the wooden surface. "Tessa left," he said quietly. "She moved to another city last month. She sent me a long email. She told me about the call she made to you in London. She told me what you said to her." I wrapped another layer of bubble wrap around the vase. "Did she?" "She said you told her that I only used her to hurt you." Marcus's voice broke, a raw, choked sound. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "Is that what you really think, Vivian? That I never loved you? That everything we had was just some sick game?" I stopped what I was doing. I turned to look at him, leaning back against the desk. "Does it matter what I think, Marcus?" I asked softly. "The result is the same. The marriage is over." "It matters to me," he cried, suddenly dropping to his knees before me, just as he had done 4 years ago on the night of our 2nd anniversary. He grabbed the hem of my suit jacket, his hands shaking violently. "Vivian, please. Just tell me there's a chance. 1%. A fraction of a percent. I'll do anything. I'll start over. We can move to London. We can leave everything behind. Just don't look at me like I'm a stranger. Please. I looked down at him. For years ago, this sight would have torn my heart out. I would have knelt beside him, wept with him, and begged him to never hurt me again. But today, as I looked at his tear-stained face, I felt only a quiet, profound sense of closure. I gently pried his hands away from my jacket. I knelt down so we were at eye level, looking into his bloodshot eyes. "Marcus," I said, my voice incredibly soft, incredibly calm. "When I was 25, I made a bad investment. I bought a stock that was highly volatile, believing I could manage the risk. For years, I watched it plummet, losing everything I had. I cried, I screamed, I blamed the market, I blamed myself. But one day, I woke up and I realized that the stock wasn't volatile because of external factors. It was just a bad stock." He stared at me, his breath hitching. "I didn't hate the stock for failing," I continued, giving his shoulder a gentle, final pat. "I just accepted the loss, closed the account, and walked away. I'm 32 now, Marcus. I have a new portfolio. I have a new life. And I don't look back at my bad investments with anger. I just look at them as lessons." I stood up, leaving him kneeling on the floor of the empty study. The doorbell rang. It was the movers. "That will be the men for the boxes," I said, picking up my handbag and my flat shoes. "The keys and the signed deed are on the kitchen counter. Goodbye, Marcus." I walked out of the study, down the hallway, and out of the apartment. I didn't look back. 1 year later, the London office of my firm was hosting a celebratory dinner at a high-end restaurant overlooking the River Thames. The air was cool, the city lights reflecting off the dark, rippling water like scattered diamonds. I stood on the terrace, a glass of champagne in my hand, enjoying the crisp evening breeze. My career was thriving. I had recently been promoted to partner, and my life was filled with intellectually stimulating work, loyal friends, and a deep, unshakable sense of peace. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out. It was an email notification from my former lawyer in my home city. Attached was a news clipping. Lynn Holdings Group files for restructuring amidst CEO scandal. The article detailed Marcus's final descent. After my departure, he had apparently grown increasingly unstable, making reckless financial decisions, alienating key board members, and eventually being ousted from his own company. The penthouse had been sold to cover his debts. He had left the city, rumor having it that he had returned to his small hometown, broken and forgotten. I looked at the screen for a moment. I didn't feel glad. I didn't feel sad. It was simply a data point, a natural consequence of a man who had never learned how to value what he had until it was gone. I deleted the email, slipped my phone back into my bag, and took a sip of my champagne. "Vivian?" A voice called out from the warmth of the restaurant. It was one of my colleagues, holding up a glass, gesturing for me to join them. "We're about to toast to the new acquisition. We need our lead analyst." "Coming," I called back, a genuine, radiant smile spreading across my face. I turned my back on the dark, quiet river, stepping into the bright, warm light of my present, leaving the shadows of the past exactly where they belonged, in the dark, far behind me.